Okay, for anybody who doesn't know what this is called FastFingers for the Commodore 64. This is FastFingers 2 that I'm working on. It still has bugs. I'm still working on it. Originally, this program was designed to work with the Commodore 64 and a Mattel television keyboard as a plug-in keyboard. They're getting to be as scarce as hen's teeth. So I'm starting to work on MIDI. There's problems with the MIDI interface, but I'm getting there slowly but surely. Right now, I'll try the way I set the program up. As soon as I touch the MIDI keyboard, it sees there's MIDI. If you don't have a MIDI keyboard, it'll use this one. Okay? Now, if I'm lucky, I'll be able to get from the top of this keyboard to the bottom with only a few glitches. But usually there's more than one or two. And it's fast. When I go to another screen, it does a couple things. It's MIDI reset, and it also makes it so I can now use this keyboard again. So that's the way to turn the keyboard on and off, basically. Or now I'm going to mix in some sounds from this other keyboard, just so you can hear that this is in tune. We'll go back with the first sound. Now, some of you are going to say, well, what's happening with this? There's a whole bunch of things going on right now with this system. We have, the effects are updated approximately 240 times a second. The MIDI routine, where is this? The MIDI routine itself right here, which is in machine language, it comes up 3,125 times a second. But I'm having trouble to get that exact number because I based the calculations first on a pure 1 megahertz clock, which the 64 does not have, and I have a 128 to complicate things a little more. I think it's 1.023 or something like that. So I have been playing around when I'm programming this. Sometimes rather than reprogramming it and reprogramming it and reprogramming it and you know, recompiling the source and then doing it, recompiling, what I have to do is I have to load all the 3 modules in, do a couple pokes, try different loop lengths that way by using pokes, and then start it. You know, it's just 20 times 256. Anyway, so the MIDI is the beginning. This is what it has to do 3,000 times a second, plus it's got to do all the other stuff that it's doing, which is check the other keyboard, monitor the other keyboard keys, and also all the effects. The effects used to be 240 times a second. Okay? So refreshing the effects, like, you know, telling the filter, okay, look at the envelope. What is coming out of the envelope 3 register from the SID chip? Okay, now let's take that number, we're going to do some number crunching with it, and we're going to push that number into the filters. That creates your wah effects. Taking that number and pushing that into pitch, that creates, you know, sounds, okay, different kinds of, I don't remember where that is by heart. but different kinds of drum sounds and things like that where the pitch drops. There's also there's other vibrato effects. They also work with pitch. All these different effects, they have to be refreshed 240 times a second. I'll get back into that. Okay, one thing I want to show you really before I forget, a couple of the changes that have been done in the last year. How many of you guys have seen FastFingers the first time or saw the YouTube video? So half of you guys have seen what it does originally. What I was telling you about was the drums. Anyways, okay, I'm going to start showing you some of the. So the one new thing I was trying to get is the MIDI. So the problem I'm having with it is I don't have all the information. When you're working on something like this, 30 years after the fact, it's hard to get data. This is a dumb interface. It's not a smart interface. What I've learned, what I think I've learned, but there might be some other data somewhere. There may be a buffer on this thing, on the MIDI interface, but I don't think there is. I think you have to grab the data as soon as it comes in. So I've created my own MIDI buffer. And so that's one of the tricky things. So I'm really leaning strongly towards making my own MIDI interface for this. And it's going to be a smart interface with a MIDI buffer built in. So that everything that comes in will be held in the buffer until it's taken out or reset. The other thing I added to this was a couple effects. There's a new effect called the gamer effect. Now, when I designed this, started designing this 30 years ago, I was trying to make all musical sounds. And little did I know that kids would actually try 30 years later to make music that deliberately sounds rotten, like chip tunes and stuff. So you just never know what they're going to like. So I'm trying this. This is called the gamer effect. Now, if I grab an old sound like that's a sound like that, and I put the gamer effect on it, there's a couple ways it works. It works differently with every sound depending on it's a pitch effect. The gamer effect is totally a pitch effect. Now I can do it that way, okay, or not a useful musical effect, I might add, but somebody will find a way of using it. Or I can, if I turn on the glide at the same time, it never goes to the original sound. It just cycles. It just cycles. It's a pitch effect. It's glide on steroids. That's what it actually is. Okay? And it does sound like if you use it on that's a different kind of sound. If I use it on there, it'll decay off and it won't stay on forever. You can add wah effects and other things into it, all the other effects. This one is even different. This one was kind of surprising. And then of course I can also make it, like I said, by turning the glide off. sound at the end. All right. Now the other... Okay. Now the other thing I did with this was originally I used to have this big blue box that used to come up here because the SID chip only has so many octaves of range. I'm not sure what it is. 8 octaves. I think I stretched an extra octave out of there. So it only has so many octaves of range. So what I had to do, if somebody hit a key or combined all the different weights together. Can you guys at the back here? Is there, you can hear me, right? I'm loud enough.
I probably would help with the mic now.
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of yelling going on over here. Switch.
Check.
There you go.
That means time.
Okay, where was I? Oh yeah. So what I did differently this time with this is rather than having this blue box come up, I said, why don't I just make rests? So when you hit a note, so you'll go to part. So sometimes if you take and you mix a bunch of notes together with a lot of harmonics, like see up there on the top left where it says harmonics. Like if you do something with the first harmonic, the third harmonic, and the fourth harmonic, you're going to push it over the limit of what the SID chip can do. So instead of making that blue box and giving you a notification, it's just going to be quiet now. And that can be used in a way when you're working with this hands-off sequencer. Speed. I'm trying to find my speed on here. I want to go slower. There. Okay. Okay. Now if I go up. The notes that are too high become rests. So now if you had two, so what you could do is you could make different rhythms because you don't have to keep reprogramming this. You can work with the same basic notes, but when they go over, you'll know that there'll be a rest. So you'll end up with those gaps. The note before had a few more notes because it was lower. So if you mix them together, you can get some kind of interesting textures, and you could sort of pattern. So then you could sort of be patterning your music in two different ways. You could be thinking about pitch at the same time while you're thinking of rhythm. So you're thinking, well, if I want to have some gaps, if I wanted to have like let's say it plays something like a shuffle rhythm, you'd have a high pitch for every third note. So it would play 2 out of 3. So when you're playing down lower, it would just play right through, like this. And when you're up higher, maybe an octave higher or something, it would do the other thing. It takes a little while though to program these arpeggios in with this. That was the other thing. Oh yes, and the other effect that was fixed, I found out, if you can believe, 27 or almost 30 years later, I find out that the distortion effect on some of the lower notes would really mess up the pitch. So they were not in pitch anymore. So what I did was I rewrote the distortion effect, and I'll let you hear that. I just canceled out the chord, so it's just playing all 3 of the same oscillator. And I'm going to take some of the other effects off. The phase shifter and vibrato. You just get a pure sound there. It's just all three voices playing exactly the same thing with no effects. Okay, now this is the new distortion. I don't know if you guys remember the old distortion. Now does that sound more like distortion? And what I did to get that is I played with the pitch. I got it, instead of always playing with the pitch, I play with the pitch on this voice, this time around the loop. I play with the pitch, but the second voice, the next time around on the loop. So that way there's always two voices that are in tune. So that's how you get that. So that's a little more closer to a real. What do you think, Leaf? What do you think? Is that better than the old distortion?
I like it.
Okay, now I'm going to get up the. Okay, who wants me to get into some of the? Oops, here we go. Dan is gone. This is like I was telling you. This is the thing that happens 3,000 times a second. And the way this works is originally let's turn it on. The way this works, originally, like I said, there were the effects running 240 times. So what I had to do was I had to split up the effects. And I'm going to have to split them up even more, I think. Okay? So what it does is it gets to the... Shut the MIDI off, because there's a problem with it. Occasionally it does its own thing. Like I said, we're still working on it. So I wanted to do, and people are gonna say, well, Dan, why didn't you just use interrupts? Just as soon as you hit the key, it's going to interrupt the system. Well, because if you get a very fast player, we have these little other things going, the sequencer and that, the sequencer is running on a clock interrupt, which is also hooked into these effects. And they're updated 240 times a second. So if you get a real fast, now if I make this priority, the number one priority, the keyboard, and you get a real fast keyboard player playing real fast with his fingers on the keyboard, he's going to make the pitch or the speed of the sequence go up and down. And it does happen, trust me, because these things, I'm really taxing this thing. This is 1 megahertz machine. So I went to this approach, as I said. My thinking was, if I have this thing scanning 3,125 times a second, it will catch every single MIDI note that comes in to the interface, because that's the fastest that the interface can work. The interface is, the data goes into the interface, from the MIDI cable to the interface at 31,250 times, but it uses 10 bits. I divided, which divided by, and it changes it into a number at this end, which is a binary number of, so anyways, it comes in as a number on the parallel port, so I can read that number off directly. And that only happens 3,125 times a second. So this is part of it here. So up here it says I have to store something because I have a thing up at the top called I have on the 0 page. Oh, and the other thing too is, maybe Leaf knows this also, and a few of you other guys. If you want it to be as fast as possible, of course you use the registers as much as possible and use 0 page as much as possible, because 0 page uses less memory, number one, and also fewer clock cycles, so it runs faster. So I have a variable that I use quite a bit called temporary, which is just temporary variable. I use it for everything. It's in the 0 page. And for some reason, it gets messed up when this interrupt comes because there's so many things depending on that. So what I do is I load that register, then I push it onto the push it onto the stack. Okay, MIDI stat is the register that the control register on the pin of the chip, and MIDI stat it tells you whether data is coming in or not, and you check it by shifting it left with an LSR command and checking to see if the carry flag has been set or is cleared. If the carry flag has been cleared, that means that no data is coming in the MIDI port at that time. We'll check it next time, a 3,000th of a second later, because we have other work to do. We can't stay here and wait for this thing. So we have to jump right into the rest of the program. So it says, go BCC next time. So next time means to skip all the MIDI interface and start implementing the effects, which started next time. Okay? Now if it does see MIDI data in there, what it does, there's a buffer pointer which I created. There's a buffer pointer which I created, and there's a buffer, and the buffer is 256 notes. Now that sounds like a ridiculous amount, and I'm only scratching the surface of this right now. But 256 notes all takes place in a 1/12 of a second. It potentially could happen within a 1/12 of a second. So that's why the buffer, I made the buffer that large. And the buffer pointer is the pointer that tells this thing which data byte to look at. Say now, since the flag was set, we know that a new byte of data came into the MIDI register. Let's start checking what that data byte is. Okay, is that top priority is MIDI node on, which is, and this for channel 1 is the number hexadecimal 90, which is MIDI node on. It says, is it MIDI node 1? I mean, is it node on? Is it number $90? Yes. If it is, go down and reset the pointer back to 0. That's how we do it. We're going to reset the pointer back to 0. So then if it sees it's 90, it goes down to reset buffer pointer, and it goes down here, loads X for the same place. Look at it, but this buffer thing seems to have been the thing that works the best right now. I'm going to see if I can try to remember what else is really different about this program. What else could I show you? Those were the new effects. I don't want to bore people. I could lecture on this thing for hours and hours on the stupid thing behind it, because I've just gotten back into this in the last year, really deep into this. Where is this whole thing heading? If all goes well, as I was saying, this will be, I'll be able to sell the program with this. Anybody who has the Syntec MIDI interface or Passport type interface will be able to interface to this computer. Right now it's not going the way it is. You can't use this on a gig. You can't have sour notes coming out every once in a while. Like I said, I've only been concentrating on the MIDI node on part. I'm having trouble with the MIDI node off and getting all the sequencer stuff working at the same time as the MIDI keyboard. There's a lot of stuff happening in the background, and this thing it's very busy. That's why I think the next step would be to use the PIC chip and make a smart interface with the buffer in it. and also the software will be on the PIC chip. There'll be no more need to use the 1541 drive. Just plug the cartridge in. Software will be there, MIDI interface will be there. I might even put hooks in it, and I might even set it up so people can run other software using that interface, but they'll have their own custom software type of thing. The only other thing, you guys have mostly seen all of the effects. Maybe I could run through the effects real quick? 2 minutes, yeah, okay, sure. Okay, I'm going to just run through the effects real quick. Okay, we're going to turn off the distortion. We're going to put on the flanger. That's with nothing. That's with the flanger. Flanger uses all 3 voices. They're all slightly detuned. The shifter just uses 2 voices to detune. Okay, the phase shifter. Not quite as thick as the flanger. If I remember correctly, that's what it does. P-kick. Hooks up the pulse width to the, you have to have a square wave in there to do it. Okay, and we'll put the P-kick on there. The pulse width, depending on the envelope 3, which comes off the envelope 3. You are seeing gamer. We'll get that swirl effect. Is a slow pit. What do you call it? Timbre change. So. Wall effects, you've been listening to them, you know. That one uses one of the wall effects in there. There's a couple of them, a couple variations. And then there's tremolo and vibrato. And, okay, I guess the time is up. So that's it for today. You want anybody? Can't ask any questions? Anybody want to ask any questions?
Talk to Patrick.
Privately? Okay. Okay, if you guys have any questions, well, because I have to move out of here. Show must go on.